الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا، من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله ومن والاه، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. الحمد لله. Bismillah. There was the Seljuks of Central Asia, of which Abu Hamid al-Ghazali radiyallahu anhu was part of. And then there were the Anatolian Seljuk. But they were very, what's interesting about the Seljuks is that they were very disturbed by a trend in all religions, which is esotericism, what's called batiniya in the Islamic tradition. They were very bothered by batini influences in Islam, and this is why Abu Hamid radiyallahu anhu was not a polemicist. He did not write a lot of polemical treatises. Some scholars are polemical, like Ibn Taymiyyah is an extremely, rahimahullah, he was an extremely polemical writer. So he was often writing to refute or to undermine the arguments of others. And there's a role in all religious traditions for polemics. The Quran itself has arguments against those who say things against the truth. But Abu Hamid was not. He was a very constructive writer. He did not really like polemics because one, there's a hub for the nafs that's very dangerous. So polemicists can often, because they're arguing, they can often end up falling into a certain trap that's very easy to fall into, especially when you're clever, which is seeing the faults in others all the time and seeing your own superior position. So he did not do a lot, but the polemics that he did write against were against the batiniya, which is very interesting. Now, one of the things about our time is that the batiniya influences on our civilization are great, both within Islam and without. So there is a lot of, the whole New Age philosophy comes out of batiniya. A lot of the religious trends that you see, even within traditional Christianity, which was also deeply opposed to esotericism. And the Sufis, I'm not going to have that, yeah, that's okay. The Sufis who have a tendency to slip into esotericism, which is very dangerous, and get involved in things like numerology and things. So within the Sufic tradition, you have those problems as well. So and Imam al-Ghazali addresses that. What people tend to forget, even though he's accused of being a Sufi, is that he was one of the greatest critics of the Sufis, which is very interesting. That Abu Hamid, radiyallahu anhu, they always say that he's the one that brought Sufism into Islam. It's not true. Sufism was very much part of Islam before Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. And in many ways, he's a derivative writer in Tasawwuf. He does not he's really taking previous sources like Abu Talib, Qut al-Qulub, Kashf al-Mahjub, and other very great works of literature, Abu Na'im's Hilya, and other things, and he's condensing and writing. If he does have a genius in Tasawwuf, it's certainly, his pen was an extraordinary pen. He had great abilities at drawing analogies, at creating images that tend to be unforgettable when you read them. But he also, prior to him, most scholars saw the science of Tasawwuf as a part of Islam. It was what they called ihsan. And there's people that don't like the word Tasawwuf, but the word Tasawwuf has been used consistently in our civilization for almost since the very start. So this idea somehow that it's a problematic term is problematic in and of itself. Because if you get rid of it, what you're doing is denying an incredible amount of tradition, including Ibn Taymiyyah, who has a whole volume on fatwa in tasawwuf, including Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, who wrote a book commenting on one of the most important works of tasawwuf and asserts the tasawwuf of Imam al-Junayd. So the problem with the word, if there is a problem, is that the word becomes nebulous. And one of the most important things in any tradition is to define terms. And so much of what is not tasawwuf and has nothing to do with tasawwuf is included in this concept of tasawwuf. And so, like everything, tasawwuf needs cleansing because things accrue within traditions that are alien to the tradition. So that's one thing. But Abu Hamid, and he was a truly great genius. I mean, one of the truly great geniuses in human history. He is more important in the Islamic tradition as an usuli scholar than he is as a Sufi. And as a mutakallim, as a theologian. He's more important. His work in Mustasfa is the single most important book of usul after Imam Shafi'i's preliminary work on the subject. The Mustasfa is the foundation of usul. One of the ironies of the Hanbali tradition is that their most important work on usul, Rawdat al-Nadhr by Ibn Qudama, is an actual abridgment of Abu Hamid al-Ghazali's book. And so the Hanbali madhab itself is their usul is based on the usul of Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, which is just the irony, I think, is lost on a lot of people. But what he did was he showed that tasawwuf, or rather ihsan, is not a third of Islam. It is the animating factor of the religion itself. In other words, it is the heart of Islam. And without it, Islam becomes a dead thing. And that's really what he did. He centralized the concept of spirituality, that this is a spiritual tradition before it's a legal tradition, before it's a theological tradition, before it's a religious tradition of rites and rituals. It is a spiritual tradition. And the reason for that is because he understood that the single most important of all the sciences of human beings is the science of being. And he clearly states this in the introduction to his book on usul and mustasfa, where he says that all knowledges can be divided into two: universal knowledges and particular knowledges. There's only one universal knowledge, and that is the knowledge of al-mawjud, of being, of what exists. So he understood that metaphysics is the foundation of knowledge. And what he understood is that the strangest thing about the world is being itself. Being itself. Like the story that David Foster Wallace tells in his famous essay, This is Water, where two young fish are swimming by an old fish, and the old fish says to the two young fish, "How's the water, boys?" And the two young fish move a little further along, and then one says to the other, "What's water?" Right? Because we don't think about being. It's what we exist in. And so we don't actually think about it. But it is the single most important thing to understand. Because this thing which is being is called alam. It's called the world, the cosmos. Alam in Arabic is called ismu ala. It's the noun of instrumentation. It's the noun of instrumentation. Like tabi' is what you imprint with. The tabi'. It's what you make an imprint with. Alam is what you know by. It's the instrument of knowledge. That's why it comes from ilm itself. It's the instrument of knowledge. And so knowledge is the single most important thing that we do as human beings. Why? Because we are knowers by our very nature. This is what sets us aside from all the other animals. And this is why Allah says about people that don't seek knowledge, "Inhum kal an'am, bal hum adallu sabila." They're like cattle. No, they're even more astray. Why? Because a cow is being a cow. Its being is being fulfilled in its cowness. But a human that does not seek knowledge is not being a human, because it's not fulfilling its humanity as a knower. This is what we are as human beings. And this is why life itself is a spiritual experience. You've got all these people, I want a spiritual experience. This is it, folks. This is the spiritual experience. Because how are we experiencing it? With consciousness, which is not a material thing. It's a spiritual thing. We're experiencing it through the senses, but the reality of our lives are spiritual realities. We're having a spiritual experience right now by simply being conscious. You don't need, if you want an altered consciousness, there's drugs for that. That's why people take drugs, because they don't understand they're already having a spiritual experience. They don't need drugs to have a spiritual experience. You don't need to jump out of a plane to have a spiritual experience. You don't need to be on Mount Kilimanjaro to have a spiritual experience. It's right here and right now. It's just simply being aware, being conscious, because this is an immaterial phenomenon. Consciousness is not a material reality. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He created the human being, خَلَقَهُ, right? مِن طِينٍ. He created him from teen. This is the body. It's made of mud, material matter, water and earth, which is the essential elements of this planet. Water and earth. 70% water, 30% earth. Like our bodies, 70% water, 30% earth. Allah created us min teen, right? But then He said, نَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِن رُوحِي. I breathed into it from my ruh. So this is, when He talked about the nafs, the soul, He didn't call it teen. He said it came from His ruh. Because your soul is not a material thing. It's a spiritual thing. And it's your soul, through the vehicle of the body, that's experiencing the world. You can't experience the world through anything other than your soul. And that's why mere experience of life on earth is a spiritual experience. And there are people that become aware of it, and there are people that think they're having a material experience. They're called materialists. They deny the unseen, even though their very soul can't be seen. Their own consciousness can't be seen. You cannot find consciousness in a microscope. Scientists have been looking for it for a very long time, and they haven't found it. So the very thing that enables them to deny the spirit is the spirit itself. And this is why the malahida are ahmaqun nas. They're the most stupid people. They are. Our ulama have always said that those who deny the soul are fools, because they're denying the very thing that's enabling them to deny it. So that is one of the great contributions of Abu Hamid, to recognize that the animating spirit, the thing that gives it life, that gives it animus, spirit, is this ihsan. And that Islam without iman is nifaq, but iman and Islam without ihsan becomes, it can become a harsh thing very often, like what we see now amongst some of these extremists. It's a harsh thing. Or it become or it becomes just a dry, legalistic thing that doesn't enable people to taste the sweetness. Man dhaqa halawat al-iman. The Prophet ﷺ said, the one who's tasted the sweetness of faith. Faith has a sweetness. And that's when ihsan infuses the faith. So, you're here seeking knowledge, inshallah. That's the point of this. It's called a rihla, because the rihla in classical Islamic tradition was a journey of knowledge. And there are many great rihlas The Rihla of Ibn Jubair is a great Rihla. It's worth reading. It's translated into English for those who are interested. And it's a very interesting picture of, for want of a better term, medieval Islamic civilization, where you, for instance, when he goes to Damascus, there were circles of ilm all throughout the masjid. They did the Dalail Khairat, they did Khatam of Quran, they were studying all the traditional sciences. This was rife throughout the Muslim world. These mosques were filled with either dhikr or knowledge. And these are the two paths to God. The path of the ulama is not the path of the ubbad. Every alim is a abid by nature, because our tradition is ibadah. But the ibadah of the alim is study. And this is something that a lot of students of knowledge fail to understand within the tradition. And this is why within our tradition, these people that are opposed to tradition have been very successful, because they take the so-called traditionalists and they look at their activities and their practices, and very often they've lost study as a foundation of their tradition. They're more interested in doing mawalid or doing inshad, which is not the way of the ulama. The way of the ulama was not having like gatherings of dhikr. The way of the ulama was study. The way of the ulama was dars and transmission and naql and mastering the ulum. It takes a lifetime to master the Islamic tradition of immense study and hard work. We don't have people that have that himma anymore. And this is part of our crises, is that we have so much ignorance, widespread ignorance. And this is why when people come with refutations and proofs, even if they're fallacious ones, they're very often, the traditionalists are unable to actually refute them, because they don't have knowledge anymore. All they can say is, oh, he's a Wahhabi, or this is their response, is just to say, and dismiss them like this. But meanwhile, these other schools spread more and more, because the traditionalists in many ways have abandoned their tradition. They give it lip service and they tell how important it is, but they actually don't really do the work needed to preserve the tradition. Because you can have a library with all the books on the shelves, but if you never open the books, all you're preserving is the books. And Allah faults the Jews for that. كَمِثِلَ الْحِمَارِ يَحْمِلُ أَسْفَارًا. Like the donkey that carries books on its back, if you don't understand the tradition. And this is why one of the things at Zaytuna that's been, for me, bête noire, is this students coming in thinking that they're going to be doing dhikr and doing things, and I'm not interested in that. I want them memorizing Quran and studying. The best practice of ibadah, if you want to do extra ibadah, is to memorize the Quran. Instead of singing qasidas that are nice. I like qasidas, I like poetry, they're nice, but you can sing qasidas until the cows come home. It's not going to rectify the crisis of our ummah. And the proof is, in many of the places where the worst calamities are happening, those places were filled with qasida singing and filled with mawalid. And that's the truth. And it didn't prevent these fitan from happening. This is a knowledge of, this is a civilization of knowledge. This is the civilization of knowledge. Franz Rosenthal, the great Jewish Orientalist and historian, who was a world-class historian, he wrote a book called Knowledge Triumphant, arguing that he could not find any civilization in human history like the Islamic civilization, because this is a civilization, he said, that put the pursuit, the acquisition, the development, and the transmission of knowledge at the forefront of its existence. Its very reason for existence was knowledge itself. And the Prophet ﷺ was a seeker of knowledge. He was a seeker of knowledge. Why was he up in the cave? What was he trying to do in the cave? He was trying to know reality. He wanted to know reality. كَانَ يَتَحَنَّثُ. And the Prophet ﷺ, what is the first commandment that he's given once that reality addresses him? اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق. Read in the name of your Lord. And then tells him that he's the one that علم بالقلم. علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. He taught with the pen, and he taught the human being what he didn't know. So at the very beginning of the revelation is read in the name of your Lord. Read. Who taught with the pen? He taught with the pen, and he taught man what he didn't know. And this is why the path of knowledge was the central path of our tradition. But not everybody is cut out for this path. Everybody has to do some suluk on the path of knowledge, and this is called fardul ayn, which is really what this rihla is about. But from amongst those who, and this is where you discover whether or not this is really your path. Once you learn your fard ayn, during that time, if you tasted a love for that knowledge and a desire to learn more, then you're going to want to set out on that path of the pursuit of knowledge. For those who don't have that, and there are many examples in the hadith, but always, almost always, the person that the Prophet permits the other path is nakira. Look in the hadith, and you will notice that, like for instance, the hadith of bin Busr, who says that, Ata an-nabiyya rajulun, a man, nakira, a man came to the Prophet, and he said, Ya Rasulullah, قد كثرت علينا شرائع الإسلام فباب أتشبث به جامع. Give me some door that's comprehensive that I can do. And the Prophet ﷺ said, لا يزال لسانك رطبا بذكر الله. So he's saying, look, I can't learn all this stuff. It's too much. Give me something that I can do that will enable me to get to my Lord. And the Prophet ﷺ said, let your tongue always be moist with the dhikr of Allah. So that is a path. It's the path of ibadah. But فَقِيهٌ وَاحِدٌ أَشَدُّ عَلَى الشَّيْطَانِ مِنْ أَلْفِ عَابِدٍ. One person who understands this religion with knowledge is worse for shaitan than 1,000 devotees, than 1,000 people of the path of dhikr. And dhikr is a path, and I'm not denying that path. Dhikr is a path, but the path of knowledge is a higher path, and it's the central path of our religion. When the Prophet came into the masjid and saw two hilaq, one of them they were doing dhikr, and another they were studying, he sat with the one studying. And he said, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ مُعَلِّمًا. I was sent as a teacher. So, if you want to know which circle your Prophet ﷺ is going to sit in, it's the one where people are learning. Not where they're doing dhikr, saying, Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar. And those are good circles. And that's part of our religion. But that's not the circle that the Prophet ﷺ sat in. It's the circle of knowledge. And all of the greatest scholars of tasawwuf were great ulama. They were muhaddithun, muftun, fuqaha. Abu Hamid is considered one of the greatest fuqaha of the Shafi'i madhab. He's arguably the greatest usuli scholar in the history of Islam. He was a logician. He wrote 6 books on logic. He was a mutakallim. He wrote very important works on theology. So, that's a very important thing to remember while you're here. مَنْ سَرَكَ طَرِيقًا يَلْتَمِسُ فِيهِ عِلْمًا سَهَّلَ اللَّهُ لَهُ بِهِ طَرِيقًا إِلَى الْجَنَّةِ. So, hadith sahih, in Sahih Muslim. Whoever sets out on a path, يَلْتَمِسُ فِيهِ عِلْمًا. And there it's nakira. He seeks a knowledge. It could be tajweed, it could be hadith, it could be fiqh. It has to be ilm nafi', a beneficial knowledge. And even engineering is a beneficial knowledge. Medicine is a beneficial knowledge. These are called fara'id kifaya. These are not the ayn knowledges, they're kifaya, they're collective obligations. In Bab al-Jihad, in the Maliki texts, this is where they mention the obligation of engineering, of medicine, of agriculture, studying agriculture. We need people to study, especially now, studying alternative methods to these methods that are destroying topsoil and things like that, like hydroponics and other methods of alternative agriculture, organic agriculture, getting back to the things that preserve the land and not dissipate and waste and destroy the land. So medicine is one of the great sciences of Islam. Many of our ulama were physicians as well as being ulama. So medicine is a great science, and it's a knowledge, and it's a beneficial knowledge. And if you set out after learning your fard ayn to become a doctor with the intention of keeping Allah's servants healthy, then you are rewarded. And it will be a path to Jannah. Seeking medicinal knowledge can be a path to Jannah if your niyyah is the right niyyah. Going to engineering school can be a path to Jannah if you learn your fard ayn. Our religion is not simply religious knowledge per se. And I mean by all knowledge is religious knowledge if it's beneficial. But what I'm talking about is what we usually think of when we think about religious knowledge, which is fiqh and hadith and tafsir and usul. These are the quote-unquote religious knowledge. No, all knowledge that's beneficial is religious knowledge in our tradition. And this is why scientists are honored in our tradition. One of the crises, and I wrote about this recently with the moon sighting, one of the crises is that so many of the people that study fiqh now no longer know knowledge. They don't know science. And this is one of the things that secularists use against religion, is look at these religious people. They know nothing about science. Our tradition was a tradition that science was part of our religion, which is why many of our ulama were cutting-edge scientists at their time. Abu Hamid was a master of geometry. Qadi Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi said by 15 he could survey land, he knew trigonometry, spherical geometry, and he could use an astrolabe with excellent abilities. At 15, he was a master of the mathematical sciences. Our religion, the Muslims, created many of the higher mathematics that ended up being developed in Europe with calculus to solve religious problems. They used the trigonometry to solve problems of qibla and problems of moon determination. NASA, all these moon sighting charts that the West uses now were developed by the Ottomans. That's where they actually got them. The Ottomans were using trigonometry. I have a book, a handwritten manuscript on the azyaj, the charts that they used to do for moon sighting. And now we've got people that ignore them. They're looking for the moon in a place where it's impossible to see the moon. By consensus. It's a ilm qat'i. And we've got fuqaha say, no, but the book says if 2 just people see the moon, then we fast or break our fast. But if science says it's impossible for those 2 just people to see the moon, they must have seen something else. Like Shurayh al-Qadi, who went out to sight the moon with a man, and the man said, Subhanallah, there it is. And Shurayh's looking, he said, I don't see it. He said, right there, look. He said, I don't see it. He said, Subhanallah, it's right there. And so Shurayh looked at the man, he noticed one of his eye had curved over in front of his eye in a crescent form. And so he took it, moved it back, and he said, do you still see it? He said, Subhanallah, it's gone. This is what we're dealing with. There's so many things you can see in the sky. Anybody that's gone moon sighting over a period of time knows how tricky moon sighting at the early stage, the birth of the moon, is very difficult to see. But if science says you cannot see it, according to our usuli scholars from centuries ago, they said that al-falaki yanfi al-ru'ya wa la yuthbituha. This is al-Qarafi, one of the greatest usuli scholars of Egypt. He said, the astronomer negates a sighting. In other words, if the astronomer says that he couldn't have seen it, it's impossible. Because that knowledge is not new knowledge. It was developed centuries ago. Observational astronomy has not developed considerably in the last 3,000 years. Theoretical astronomy, that's a whole other kettle of fish. But the observational astronomy has not developed. They could predict eclipses to very, very narrow margins centuries ago. They knew when new moons would arrive. They knew when it could be seen. They knew what day it could be seen. And the Prophet said, if it's obscured, either by cloud, he didn't say if clouds obscure it. If it's obscured, then أَكْمِلُ الْعِدَّةَ ثَلَاثِينَ, complete 30 days. And the other hadith, فَقْدُرُوا, calculate it. Ibn Rushd says that hadith is mujmal. In other words, it's ambiguous. And the mubayyin, the clarification of it is in the other riwayah, فَأَكْمِلُوا الْعِدَّةَ ثَلَاثِينَ. And he negated calculation. There's only 3 scholars in the history of Islam that permitted calculation. And they were all refuted by the vast majority of scholars because they said the mubayyin of hadith overrides the mujmal hadith. Anyway, that's a whole other debate. But my point is the loss of this balance between natural sciences and between the sciences that are based on revelation is a crisis in our ummah. And this is why we need both. But we also need our natural scientists to have enough knowledge of the traditional sciences to know their limits, because they often don't realize their limits. And also for the people on the other side to know their limits. We're half educated on both sides. There's very few fully educated people today that are educated in natural sciences and are educated in the qualitative sciences. So in conclusion, you're here to study, and so use that time wisely. In one of the early chapters of Riyadh al-Salihin, which is a very important book, it's the best book of hadith for lay people to read. Hadith books are actually very dangerous for non-experts. In fact, one of the greatest hadith scholars in the history of Islam said, hadith books will lead you astray if you're not trained. They are actually madhinna lil-dalala. They will lead you astray if you're not trained. And this is why all the attacks on Islam, the vast majority of them are from the hadith tradition, not from the Quran. Because the hadiths, our scholars were not like some of the medieval scholars in other world religion traditions, where they hid all of their things that they didn't like. If it bothered them, they just removed them from the books. Our scholars put everything in the book. And this is why the seerah book, the earliest seerah book, has stories that are clearly impossible to have occurred. But the enemies of Islam take those stories and they say, look, the Prophet ﷺ was poking out the eyes of people that were in ridda and things like this. The Prophet never did anything that was cruel. He didn't torture people. And these are qawa'id in our deen. But those stories are there. You'll find them if you read them. Even some got into the Sahih hadith. Imam Ali, the hadith that he burnt people in Palestine for ridda, which is one of the proofs that one group recently burning people used as a kind of proof for burning people. Any hadith that puts Ali in a bad light is suspect, even if it gets into the hadith collection. Any hadith, because of the fitna. So you will get hadiths even in the Sahih, if they put Ali in a bad light, they're suspect. In that very same hadith, his own cousin, Ibn Abbas, said that he wouldn't have done it. So how is it that Ali could have less knowledge than Ibn Abbas, especially about something as momentous as that? So anyway, these are the problems of a hadith. But if you're going to read a hadith on your own, just for the enjoyment of reading directly the words of the Prophet ﷺ, which has a type of what they call fayd. There's a great blessing in reading his words because they do affect the heart. The best book is the Arba'in an-Nawawiyah, which still should be read with a teacher. It's much better to read with teachers. especially there's a few hadiths in there that are problematic. The hadith, umirtu an uqatil an-nas hatta yashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa anna Muhammad Rasulullah. That hadith, umirtu, he didn't say umirtum, you were commanded to fight people. He said umirtu, he was commanded to fight the Arabs. That hadith is khas. It was not considered a general hadith. And in the later, when Abu Bakr and Umar debated about he used that hadith, Umar to say that Abu Bakr shouldn't fight the Arabs, but he said even if they refused the tying cord of a camel in zakat they used to pay to the Prophet, I would still do it. Those were Arabs that had submitted to that time. But anyway, that hadith is not a general hadith. It's not meant to be applied. And this is what Ibn Abi Jamrah and others have said. It's clear. So people can read that hadith, and this is what these people now do. Oh, we're commanded to fight people until they say La ilaha illallah. No. You let people, lakum dinukum waliya din. In fact, the great Ibn Ashur, the Tunisian scholar, said about all of the hadiths, abrogation is one of the major problems in our tradition, this idea that there are ayahs that are abrogated. And there are many books, the Malikis tended to incline towards the abrogation, and Qadi Abu Bakr wrote a great book on abrogation. But there are very few hadiths in which there's a consensus of abrogation. Very few ayahs in which the ulama actually agreed upon that they were. And anytime there's an ikhtilaf about the Quran, is it muhkam or not, you should assume it's muhkam. Because there should be an ijma' for that. It's not something, the Quran is the kalam Allah. Fakhruddin al-Razi said, if we say that all these verses about being patient and bearing other people's wrongs, if we say these are all abrogated, we've essentially abrogated makarim al-akhlaq. We abrogated ethics. Why would Allah command people to do those things? And then say, oh, I didn't mean that really. You don't have to do that. But the difference of Mecca and Medina is the difference between personal behavior without authority and the behavior of the government. The government has the government's not there to forgive. They're there to redress wrongs. And so when you get into power, you don't when somebody steals your car and then he goes to trial for doing it, and the judge says, "No, it's okay. You can have the car, and I forgive you." He has no right to do that. It's your car, and if you want to redress the wrong, but you have a right. If somebody stole your car, you have a right to actually forgive them, and not take it to. Maybe he needs it more than me. You can do that, and just say, like a story about Abu Yazid, who somebody stole his clothes at the hammam, and he ran after him, chasing him, and the thief's running further, and he said, no, slow down. He said, I want to just say you can have them. أَرَدْتُ أَنْ أَجْعَلَكَ فِي حِلْ. I just wanted to put you into the halal. And that's a maqam for people, that forgive other people. And that's a right. But once, like for instance, if somebody steals in your store, you can forgive them. You don't have to take them to the government. But once you take it to the government, then there's no wasata. You can't say, oh, I forgive him, or no. Once you bring the government in, the government has a job which is public order and safety. So these are the nuances of our tradition that have to be studied. So his tradition in this book is to bring, he has a chapter like this is في فضل طلب العلم والدلالة على الخير or دلالة على الخير. So it's the virtue of seeking knowledge and of pointing others to good. And he begins with some verses. قُلْ هَلْ يَسْتَوِي الَّذِينَ يَعْلَمُونَ وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. Are they the same, those who know and those who don't know? They're not the same. يَرْفَعِ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مِنْكُمْ وَالَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْعِلْمِ دَرَجَاتٍ. Allah elevates those who believe amongst you and who have been given knowledge by degrees. So the more belief, the more knowledge, the higher your rank. إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. Those who have true khashya of Allah, awe of Allah, are ulama, are people of ilm. Because khashya is fear that is accompanied with knowledge. You cannot say, al-kalb yakhshani, the dog fears me. You can say, al-kalb yakhafuni. Khashya is always maqroona bil-ilm. It has to be coupled with knowledge, or it's not khashya. روى الشيخان عن معاوية رضي الله تعالى عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من يريد الله به خيرا يفقهه في الدين. So this is what's called a jumla shartiyya. Whomsoever Allah wishes good for or wills good for. من يريد الله به خيرا يفقهه في الدين. مجزوم بالشرط. So he gives him understanding of the deen. Now later fiqh it meant knowledge of fiqh, of ahkam. That's not the meaning in the hadith. The meaning is understanding, fahm, which can include fiqh and knowledge of fiqh. That's why he's called a faqih, because he understands those ahkam, and fiqh is very important. وروى الشيخان عن أبي موسى رضي الله تعالى عنه قال قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم مثل ما بعثني الله به من الهدى والعلم كمثل غيث أصاب أرضا فكانت منها طائفة طيبة قبلت الماء فانبتت الكلى والعشب الكثير وكان منها أجادب أمسكت الماء ونفع الله بها الناس فشربوا منها وسقوا وزرعوا وأصاب طائفة منها أخرى إنما هي قيعان لا تمسك ماء ولا تنبت كلأ فذلك مثل من فقه في دين الله ونفع وما بعثني الله به فعلم وعلم ومثل من لم يرفع بذلك رأسا من لا يرفع بذلك رأسا ولم يقبل هدى الله الذي أرسلت به. So this hadith is a very important hadith, because the Prophet gives the likeness of what God sent him with from guidance and knowledge. That it's like a rain that settles on an earth, right? Comes down on an earth. And a group منها طائفة طيبة قبلت الماء. So there's a good earth that قبلت الماء. And it's very interesting, قبلت الماء, because one of the things that happens when rain comes is the earth literally